First, I want to apologize to those who are religious, but this story must be shared. Back in 2003, when I was only 15 years old, my heart stopped for 6 minutes. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, as was my daily routine while I was walking home from the bus stop. As I was strolling along a road about 4 blocks from my house, I suddenly started feeling nauseous. It came on abruptly without warning, but that entire day, nothing had seemed out of the ordinary. I had lunch with Bosco, bread and marinara sauce, something I'd eaten hundreds of times throughout high school. Before I had a chance to consider other possible causes, I suddenly broke out in a cold sweat, followed by a powerful vibration in my chest. My heart was racing so fast that I later learned it was a condition called ventricular tachycardia. Shortness of breath and collapse hit me, and I could no longer perceive my surroundings. Everything that happened next was only recounted to me by others. Apparently, I passed out on the road, where a woman driving a car nearly crushed my skull under her tires. Fortunately, she stopped in time, tried to wake me, and then frantically called emergency services. Paramedics quickly arrived and discovered that my heart had stopped. Medically speaking, I was dead. They immediately rushed me to the nearest hospital, and somehow on the way, they managed to get my heart beating again. From that moment began a long, painful journey through the U.S. healthcare system, undergoing surgeries, not to mention a pacemaker, leading to a mountain of debt that my family is still grappling with. But at least my heart is stable now, and I no longer thank God. What happened that day taught me never to thank God for anything. Because during those terrifying 6 minutes, as my lifeless body was transported across the city with 2 paramedics working tirelessly to save me, my soul transcended our reality to visit the other side. In that journey, I learned dark truths about the universe that I wish I had never known. Perhaps by sharing this story, I can help humanity prepare for what awaits us after we pass. It began with a blinding, radiant white light that enveloped me, soothing my soul. That's all they tell you: happiness and welcoming the stuff of spiritual experiences. I felt a distinct sensation of floating, as if the light was lifting me upward beyond some gates that my dazed consciousness could barely register. Even now, when I reflect on it, I don't believe they followed any physical laws. But I still remember the feeling of being accepted, of those gates opening wide to welcome me, gates I surely wouldn't have passed through if they hadn't wanted me to. In every conceivable scenario, I arrived at a place without spatial dimensions, a place beyond reality, one that only made sense while I was there. I absolutely don't believe a tangible being could comprehend that intermediate realm, as there's something about that intangible existence that defies explanation. So what I received were more impressions than images. I wasn't alone. A multitude of impulses surrounded me when I arrived. Having been raised in a Christian family, I initially thought they were angels. In their shapeless forms, I performed the spiritual equivalent of opening my arms, expecting a warm embrace from them, but instead I felt as though I was chained by their power, like a bond tethered to a corner. Humiliation and terror quickly overwhelmed me. These were clearly not the benevolent, supernatural beings I had once believed were waiting for us. These were cruel, emotionless overlords dominating my soul. Why did I think this? Because my soul wailed like a stubborn child, and something resembling cold mocking laughter responded. Thoughts flooded my consciousness like birds soaring through my mind's eye, bringing with them horrifying truths about existence that I will try my best to convey to you now. Our universe, like countless others, operating in parallel, contains only a tiny fraction of the total energy that exists. It's like a farm used to produce souls, which only emerge under precise conditions in our universe. When you hear scientists talk about the impossibly small probability of our universe forming, it's because it didn't arise naturally. It was designed with purpose, and the hands that created it were not those of benevolent gods, but of greedy beings who care nothing for the life they've bestowed. Our ultimate purpose, which I learned as my soul was bound, is to mature until we are ready to serve them in a higher realm. The Big Bang that birthed our universe ultimately led to the emergence of humanity, a species conscious enough to be harvested and enslaved in a higher realm, where space-time dissolves into eternity, and we must live in submission. Those 6 minutes in heaven felt like a lifetime. I endured it as entertainment for an entity that appeared like the soul of a child with a penchant for psychological manipulation and torment. It toyed with me like a cat with a mouse, delighting in the extreme pain it caused. The physical suffering we imagine hell inflicts on sinful souls is nothing compared to the torment of the soul. I can only liken it to the grief of losing a loved one, an oppressive emotional wound deep in your core. Clearly, my time on Earth wasn't over. As I was about to return, I was threatened not to reveal their existence to the rest of our species. The reward for keeping their secret would be a slightly more comfortable position in the hierarchy of lowly slaves. Conversely, if I dared convince others of their existence, unimaginable pain, far worse than what I had already endured, awaited me, but I couldn't imagine anything worse than what I had already gone through. In the weeks that followed, overwhelmed by grief and indescribable torment, I tried to explain it to anyone who would listen. Everyone told me it was simply a severe and traumatic event for a young man, that it had left scars on my psyche as well as my heart. I gave up trying to convince them and slowly began forcing myself to believe what they told me, that it was all just my imagination. A dream of death conjured by a mind grappling with impending mortality, trying to make sense of the experience. Then I met someone who claimed to have met God. Years later, the author of a nonfiction book recounted his near-death experience when he visited my hometown. I won't reveal the author's name because I don't want to be dragged into a lawsuit, which he would surely file if he read that I was disparaging him. I attended his book reading and afterward confronted him about his story. I looked into his eyes and asked if he had truly met God, a question I'm sure he'd answered hundreds of times. He just smiled and nodded, assuring me that God was real and full of love. In a playful moment, I decided to tell him I knew the truth, that enslavement awaited us all. A glint in his eyes showed he knew the truth too. He had also flatlined like me and visited the other side, but lied about it in his book because he knew. He knew the truth about heaven, the horrific place where our souls would be eternally tormented. There's one customer none of us are allowed to serve. I work at the Lone Star Diner located between Carson and Reno. The diner's name has been changed, of course, for obvious reasons I'll explain later. Why do I work at the Lone Star Diner? Well, kind stranger, my life plans didn't exactly pan out. Generally, if you're caught working at a diner after college, especially one in the middle of nowhere like this, it means things haven't gone too smoothly. But why this diner? Why the Lone Star? I know you probably didn't ask, but I still think it deserves an answer. Among all the restaurants in the world, what makes the Lone Star special is the pay. Yes, the salary is fantastic, about $50 an hour. Naturally, with such a sky-high wage, there's got to be a good reason, and that reason is him. My first day on the job was decent, or at least as decent as it could be. I'd worked in the service industry before, so I felt capable of handling the odd surprises that come with diner customers. I could adapt to the inconsistency of unwritten rules pretty quickly, like how some areas of the restaurant had to be spotless at all times, while others even the owner didn't care about. You also had to serve customers quickly, but not too quickly. Damn, the customers here don't like being rushed, so you've got to give them time to feel the floor under their boots, to brood about the future and lament past events. You know, the usual stuff in a gloomy diner like this. They come here to be alone sounds contradictory, doesn't it? Of course, these vaguely defined rules also apply to the cooks. If by some miracle you're a renowned chef wanting to work here, your job is to keep your damn talent a secret. Your task is to make classic dishes as decently as possible. Not fancy or extravagant. The quality isn't bad, but it's not amazing either. Just good enough to hit the mark of tasty. That's why customers keep coming back. Weeks passed and I rose to the occasion. Or maybe I just learned to bow down and embrace the routine well. You want deliberate mediocrity executed to perfection. You've found your guy. Most customers just wanted a cup of coffee and a late breakfast served at a moderate pace with predictable check-ins from the server or waiter. And that was it. I'm not a subtle person. So one day I decided to ask my boss the question in the middle of a shift. I didn't want to ruin it a good thing by being suspicious, but it'd be annoying if I didn't indulge my curiosity. Why $50 an hour? She didn't even look up from her work at the cash register, counting money with practiced precision. Didn't I explain this on your first day? Because you have to follow the rules strictly, and if it's an important rule, you need to be absolutely perfect. That pay is for my expectations. I grimaced. Right, high expectations. You think I'm joking? No, I paused, wondering why I'd spoken up. I just think you're running a really great operation, more than you might realize. It's still work, but it feels fair. God, my deflection skills were awful. I'd have to polish them for next time. She looked up from her half-finished task, giving me a stern look. I don't run this diner and following the rules. Here also means you're taking care of yourself. What do you mean I'm your boss, of course? And I'll pay you well for working here, but you should know there's more going on around here than just you in this diner. She glanced at her watch and sighed. I'd usually save this speech for the end of the month, but since you're curious, Cole, if you don't think you can follow instructions strictly, or if you object or demand more answers, you'd better quit now. I won't see it as trouble or a violation. You'll get a week's pay in full. The conversation ended there. I tried to find a way to ask more, but it seemed my boss didn't want to continue the topic. And you know what? That was fine. If she wanted me to keep my head down and work, I could do that. The job was fine. The small talk with customers was fun. My coworkers were friendly, and most importantly, the pay was high. I'd found a place to stash my life's failures, a place to rebuild. Maybe it was a Saturday, I think, when I first noticed him sitting in the far corner at an old, rarely used chair. I don't know how long he'd been waiting, but he looked patient. I had a strange feeling this person had been ignored without any staff greeting him. Though I didn't recall seeing him come in, he wore a brown velour shirt with short hair, styled like he stepped out of the mid-50s. His smile was calm, though a bit outdated. He seemed normal overall. I started walking from behind the counter toward him, but immediately my arm was grabbed tightly. It was Melanie, my boss, with a grip so strong it made me drop my order pad. Her nails dug into my skin. Those important rules, she said. What I asked, confused. Do you remember our talk about the rules? This is the most important one. That man, she gestured toward the customer who caught my attention, sitting upright with hands lightly clasped, a shy smile on his face. You don't go near him, and you don't say a word to him. But he's a customer. Her grip tightened, numbing my arm, as if she was unleashing some invisible anger on me. Right now, I'm asking you to be smart enough not to ask any more questions and just follow instructions. Don't go to his table. Don't talk to him. You can yell curses at him from a distance if you want, though I don't know why you'd need to, but absolutely do not go near him or take his order. A heavy breath through her nose, a shake of her head, and a glare from my boss. Every violation has consequences, and they're not pleasant. So I stood watching him from what I assumed was a safe distance because it was hard not to. My boss did the same. Unlike the other customers who frequented the diner, I didn't feel like this man was here to be alone, to reminisce or to partake in the comforting ritual of a bland Eggs Benedict with rye. Instead, I sensed he was just curious, mildly satisfied but curious. My shift ended soon after, so I didn't get a chance to see him leave. Regardless, the experience of learning about the rule tied to him left me with an odd, sinking feeling. I liked my job, liked coming home and relaxing. In the middle of nowhere like this, it was great to look up at the wide-open sky full of twinkling stars, sometimes even catching a shooting star. I quietly wished everything in my life could stay as simple as that. I started to sense his rhythm. He showed up about once a month. On the rare occasions I saw him, I tried slipping odd questions to my boss, like who he was, where he came from, or if anyone had ever talked to him. All were met with a robotic, I don't know, and if you're scared, you can quit. Then as fate would have it, one day my boss fell seriously ill. My coworkers and I had to convince her to go home and rest mid-shift because the illness hit her suddenly and uncomfortably during the usual 1 to 3 day window at the end of the month when our customer typically appeared. And of course, he was there right after my boss left. According to me, the other servers working around were well aware of his presence and knew exactly what to do when he showed up. They had all learned to steer clear. However, driven by a basic curiosity I couldn't control, I seized the opportunity to act on a long-held desire. I shouted from the other side of the diner, knowing Melanie wasn't there to reprimand me. "Hello, can I help you with anything?" I asked him. The man turned his head from his fixed position in the chair, cupping his ear. "I'm asking if I can help you with anything." I shouted again, louder this time, causing our Thursday customers to turn with puzzled looks. Surprisingly, he responded, and I don't know why I expected his voice to sound like some crazed, distorted demon. Maybe it was the fear Melanie had instilled in me. "Sorry," he said. "I didn't hear what you said. Could you come over and ask again?" Of course not. I was just curious within the bounds of safety. I don't mean to be rude with our service, the man continued, but it's been quite a while since anyone took my order. I let the exchange end there, redirecting my attention to the other customers as usual. Eventually, he vanished without fanfare, no doorbell, jingle, no sound of footsteps on the floor. Our backroom discussions about him were always brief when he was around, like, he's here, he's gone, or sometimes this is really weird. It took me a while to understand where my urge to talk to this strange middle-aged man came from. Honestly, I was pretty scared of his presence, and all the questions about why he was at our diner disrupted the great setup. I felt I had at the time. I must have been on the edge of my courage to even speak to him. Now that he was gone, I just felt worse. The following week, I was invited to an interesting event at the diner. Generally, I could grasp what Melanie, my boss, did daily, but the one thing I still didn't understand was her bi-weekly meetings with a guy who looked like a spy, dressed impeccably with a consistent presence of state police agents and men and women in similar uniforms, stopping by the diner. I rarely paid attention, just noticed it. About an hour into my shift, while I was wiping down tables, Melanie tapped my shoulder and said, "Hey, come learn from the big boss." "A bit, okay." "Sure, I'll be right there, but who's the big boss?" The woman looked at me in silence, her eyes flashing with her unwritten rules. Asking questions was taboo and increased the risk of losing my job. Thanks for the reminder. I put away the rag and followed Melanie. She led me to the staff room and sat me at a table across from a man in a meticulously tailored suit with a sleek earpiece, the agent I mentioned earlier. In front of me was a mess of papers, documents, and scattered notes. He scanned me up and down, sizing me up like a deer in headlights, unconcerned about making me feel awkward. Then the man turned to Melanie. "How long has he been working here?" the agent asked in a gravelly Western drawl. "6 months," she replied. "And do you trust him?" "Yes, I do." The man in the suit raised an eyebrow as if to say, "If you say so." "All right then, it seems like that wanderer stopped by the diner last week," he said, gesturing toward Melanie. "You weren't here, but you were." He turned his attention to me. "Tell me the details." "Which wanderer?" I asked, confused. The agent caught the confusion in my eyes. "God, you haven't told him anything," he asked Melanie. "Sir, I know this sounds strange," she replied, "but I personally felt like he was almost drawn to curiosity, so I thought the fewer people who knew about him, the better." "The wanderer," as the agent interrupted, "is the nickname we use for the guy who sits in the corner of your diner. Or should I say the state's facility?" He paused, sorry for cutting in. "Yes, the state's. Congratulations, ma'am. You're part of a government operation." The Wanderer isn't just a cute nickname. It's our legal definition for this tricky issue. He's a phenomenon we've been tracking for years. Back then, he'd wander the desert, chatting with strangers, asking odd questions. Everything was fine, nothing unusual. Sure, a bit strange, but definitely not illegal. However, sometimes things happen because of him, things that are bizarre and downright terrifying. I could see Melanie sigh nervously at the picture being painted. Would this spark my curiosity? So have the police ever arrested him? I almost interrupted with my stupid question, but by the time I decided to hold back, the words were already out. No, not because we don't want to, but because it's not safe. The warm image in my mind of this diner was starting to crumble. "We have reason to believe he doesn't belong here," the agent said. "So where does the wanderer come from?" After that morning, I didn't attend any more meetings, not because I was banned, but because I didn't want to know more. My curiosity was gone, replaced by a gnawing, painful fear. The agents and police scattered around the diner were now just stark reminders of what my lousy serving job really was. The government presence was mostly there at the end of the month, when the wanderer was expected to show up. When he did, they didn't do much beyond watching him from distant tables and discreetly jotting notes in their notebooks. He always acted the same, just sitting at that corner table, offering no information to the agents or staff. Speaking of staff, I suddenly remembered something Melanie told me after my first month working here. The turnover rate at this diner was extremely high. Back then, I was too focused on the generous pay to understand why. Now, after 7 months working with an entirely new group of cooks and servers since I started, I saw how true her statement was. None of those who left ever said it outright, But I'm sure the underlying truth about who this diner was really for became clear in their subconscious during their time here. And maybe they didn't feel comfortable with it. I chose to stay, but not because of the pay. Honestly, I'm not even sure why I did. Now we've hired a new batch of staff who understand the vague terms of the situation, just like Melanie, me, and all the veteran employees who chose to stay. But those who couldn't reconcile the situation with their inherent curiosity were of course weeded out. Then came Malcolm. It was only his first week, and he'd already shown himself to be enthusiastic and full of energy. He completed a long list of tasks quickly and even asked for more work to tackle anything he was allowed to do, anything he could take on, anything to learn. The kid wanted to be as helpful as possible, and I think with such generous pay, it was more than enticing for a young guy like him. For our part, Melanie and I tried our best to help the kid pace himself. Now I was the one giving the spiel, and he was listening, trying to help the young guy improve. There are weird things at this diner. Rules you have to follow without question. These specific rules are non-negotiable, like gravity. The kid nodded, and I genuinely believed he was taking it in. And if you think you don't have the patience to follow them, if you think you're too good to follow the rules, it's best not to work here, I continued. I always felt a pang in my gut whenever I caught sight of the wanderer in the corner, especially during the week we hired new staff. I'm sure Melanie felt it too. On those days, Melanie and I took turns at the cash register, stopping anyone from approaching him with a simple grab of the arm. When it was Malcolm's turn, I did the same. A rough grip on his arm, just like Melanie had done to me. When I started, the kid flinched in surprise. Do you remember our little talk about the rules? Malcolm nodded weakly as if confused. I pointed to the man sitting at the far table in his brown velour shirt, staring straight ahead with what I believed at the time was no real reason for him to be there. Under no circumstances do you serve that man. Don't go near him. Don't talk to him. Pretend he doesn't exist. Malcolm lifted the trash bag he was holding, which I hadn't noticed he was carrying, probably heading outside to take it out. I was just taking out the trash, but got it. And with that, the kid walked out the door with his usual swagger. The dumpster wasn't too far, almost close enough for us to expect, so I appreciated his willingness to take on the task. I turned back to watch the wanderer. That day, the diner was crawling with agents scattered around. The man wasn't the flamboyant type, but today was an interesting exception. Officers, he said, if you have any questions, feel free to come over and interrogate me. Most agents just responded with a scoff. Really, come sit with me. I'd be happy to tell you everything. More laughter, but no one budged. He pressed on, undeterred. Clearly, I know you're very curious, taking notes on my every move, talking about me, even building this facility for me, as I was coming to terms with the fact that this was probably the first time he'd spoken this much. The doorbell jingled and a door swung open. Malcolm brushed dust off his sleeve as he walked in through the side door, right next to the table where the wanderer was sitting. It all happened so fast, but to me it felt painfully slow, like a single moment stretched across centuries. The wanderer immediately abandoned all pretense of conversing with the agents, stopping mid-sentence with an entirely new demeanor. He played the part of a downtrodden, pitiful man and said, "I've been here 30 times, and every time the service is terrible," in a mocking tone as Malcolm passed by. The young kid, acting on instinct, pulled a notepad from his pocket, turned to face the man and said, "Sorry, sir, let me help you. What would you like to order?" And then Malcolm froze. The wanderer's expression shifted again, his throat taut with undeniable excitement. He stood up from the table, and then both of them vanished, Malcolm and the wanderer completely gone from existence. The madness of that moment was interrupted by coded language. I heard over a radio, words that would be etched in my mind forever. "Black level alert, target has compromised, a civilian. Repeat, target has compromised a civilian." And that was it. A few days later, Melanie quit too. She wasn't angry with me. She'd once told me she'd leave after the 10th disappearance, that she wouldn't keep running this facility. Why that specific milestone? I don't know. All I could do from that point was keep working. After my shift, I'd go home or during lunch breaks, look up at the sky where the stars reigned, praying Malcolm would be brought back home, back from wherever he'd been taken. Meetings with the agents offered no comfort, and my exchanges with them were simple and brief. Where was he taken? The answer, he's dead. With a lingering ache in my soul, I held onto a tiny sliver of hope, if you could call it that. A lesson that I needed to be more vigilant, even more diligent. On the days the Wanderer showed up, I'd be the only server in the diner. No exceptions. I knew the agents weren't happy about it. None of them said it outright, but I could tell they'd learned something new about him every time he took someone who made a mistake. That's how they operated. This was just a zoo. They used to learn more about a creature, an entity, a visitor. With the new rule I set for myself, they could only watch him sit there or wait for him to do something different. He usually appeared on the last 3 days of the month, and running the diner during the waiting period wasn't too hard. For the first time, things didn't go as expected. This time, the Wanderer walked straight through the front door. It was nearly midnight at the end of my shift. I stood at the cash register, frozen as he took steps to close the distance. And then he was right there standing in front of me, and I was absolutely certain I was going to die. He smiled. "Don't worry too much. We have our own little set of rules we need to follow," he said. I didn't say a word, telling myself there was no man in front of me. "I know you're very curious about me." Honestly, I've taken quite a liking to you since the first time you spoke up to talk to me. Curious but cautious, a great trait, especially for a reckless species like yours. Please, I want to answer one question about why I'm here. One, I'm sure you're dying to know. I wasn't curious anymore. I swear I wasn't. He smiled. The answer is really simple because this little game, this little puzzle I'm playing is really fun. Please don't kill me, please. You really have a wonderful planet. I'll be back soon, I promise. Give me a month, maybe 2. A genuine friendly smile with kind eyes. I'll come back with a new game. And then he was gone. It took me a minute to realize a pastry box had been placed on the counter beside me. It might have been there the whole time he was talking, or it might have appeared right after he left. I opened the box and saw Malcolm's severed head, his lifeless face resting on a chaotic, incomprehensible arrangement of flowers. Next to it was a card scrawled in childish handwriting. "I brought the kid back just as you wanted." The worst part about being stuck at a diner in the middle of nowhere is realizing there's nowhere else to run. Every place on our planet is covered by a starry sky, and at any moment a visitor might drop by. My sister's boyfriend keeps showing up to family events, but she's been dead for 2 years when my sister Lisa died 2 years ago. Our family changed forever. We weren't a perfect household before nobody is, but Lisa's death shattered us. My dad barely talks anymore. My mom buries herself in every charity event she can find, and I'm stuck in anger looking for someone to blame. Lisa was the glue that held us together. She was warm, open, always smiling, the kind of person everyone gravitated toward. She loved hiking, photography, and outdoor activities. Then her death came officially declared a tragic accident. She slipped while hiking and fell off a cliff. At least that's what the police told the public. But if that's true, why does it feel like her shadow never left Lisa's ex-boyfriend? Matt was never part of our family. He and Lisa dated for about a year before they broke up. She said he was intensely controlling, constantly texting, checking up on her, or showing up unannounced, making passive-aggressive comments when she spent time with friends. I remember her joking, calling him a stage 5 clinger. But it wasn't funny. Not at all. After the breakup, Matt wouldn't accept it. He kept texting, leaving voicemails, even sending flowers to her workplace. Lisa always thought he'd eventually get bored and move on. I thought she was right until the funeral. Thank God Matt didn't show up to the funeral. A week later, he appeared at our doorstep. It was a Thursday, lightly raining. My mom opened the door and saw him holding a bouquet of lilies, Lisa's favorite flower. I just wanted to check on the family. He said, his voice soft, head tilted, as if trying to seem vulnerable. My mom, who's never been good at saying no, let him in. He sat on the living room couch talking about Lisa like he knew her better than we did, describing her laugh, her radiant smile, and how she always called pancakes with a bit of jam fancy. My dad sat silently, jaw clenched. When Matt finally left, I asked my mom why she let him in. "He's grieving too," she said. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Matt wasn't grieving at all. He was lurking. In the months that followed, Matt kept showing up. He was at family barbecues, holiday dinners, even my dad's birthday party. Of course, we never invited him, but he always had an excuse like, "Your mom said it was okay," or a firm declaration. "I think Lisa would want me here, my parents too, consumed by grief." Let it slide. "He's harmless," my mom said. "He just misses your sister." But he wasn't harmless, not when he started asking questions. Last Christmas, Matt cornered me in the kitchen. "She treated me differently, you know," he said, leaning against the counter. I froze. "What do you mean?" He gave a thin, unsettling smile I'd seen too many times. "Lisa told me things she'd never tell anyone else." "Like what?" His smile widened, like how she wasn't afraid of dying. That night, I dug through Lisa's diary. My sister was always the type to write everything down, her thoughts, plans, even shopping lists. Most of it was mundane song lyrics, doodles, random observations. But then I found a strange entry. "I think Matt's following me. He keeps texting, saying he knows something I don't. I'm starting to feel like I can't escape this." I showed it to my mom, hoping she'd see reason, but she brushed it off. "Lisa always made a big deal out of things," she said. "It's probably nothing." A few days later, I saw Matt's car parked at the end of our street. It wasn't the first time I'd caught it, multiple times before the same pickup truck tucked at the corner. I convinced myself it was a coincidence, but this time I knew he wasn't watching our family. He was watching me. Last week was my dad's birthday. Matt showed up with a gift he claimed Lisa would have bought if she were still alive, a guidebook for hiking trails. I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to confront him outside, away from my parents. "What the hell are you doing here?" I shouted. His smile didn't waver. "I just want to pay my respects," he replied. "Lisa broke up with you. She wanted nothing to do with you. Why can't you let her rest?" His eyes darkened. "She told you that, huh?" "Yeah." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "She told me a lot too. Things she wouldn't tell anyone else. Then he said something I'll never forget. I was there, you know, on the trail where she fell. My lungs burned like all the air had been sucked out." "What?" He smiled again, cold and empty. "She didn't fall. She looked into my eyes and begged me to let her go." My stomach twisted. "You're lying." He tilted his head, studying me. "Lying? Then ask yourself this. If she slipped, why did she scream?" I called the police that night. I told them everything. The stalking, the diary, his confession. When they raided his apartment the next morning, it was empty. No furniture, no clothes, no sign anyone had ever lived there. It's been a week and I haven't told my parents what he said because I don't know if they'd believe me. Every night I check the locks, sit on my bed, clutching my phone, too scared to sleep. Last night I decided to look through Lisa's diary again. I don't know why. Maybe I thought I missed something. Maybe I was looking for answers. But this time there was a new entry. The last page, previously blank, now had a single sentence scrawled in jagged black ink. "He's not following, he's already inside." My creepy neighbor keeps motioning for my kids through the window at night. I'm a 33-year-old man living in Texas with my daughter Alicia, 8, and my son Jay, 4. Their mother left 2 years ago, leaving me to raise them as a single dad. The three of us live together in a 2-bedroom apartment in a nice neighborhood. I have a steady job, and thankfully the kids are healthy. Everything was going smoothly until 2 months ago when Jay woke me up in the middle of the night sobbing. I recognized it as fearful crying, not his usual whining, which worried me a bit more. Jay often has nightmares, so I assumed that was the cause. But when I asked him what was wrong, he said, "The man next door is scaring me." I was used to Jay's stories about monsters he imagined lurking in the dark corners of his bedroom, but this was something new. It felt too specific to be one of his usual nightmares. I got out of bed and went with Jay to the kids' room. Alicia was awake on the top bunk, and from the soft glow of the nightlight, I could see her, frowning, arms crossed, looking down at her brother. I didn't turn on any other lights to get a better look outside. My eyes went to the bedroom window covered by curtains, but with a small gap Jay must have used to peer at the neighbor's house. Across the street, opposite the kids' room, were two windows of the neighbor's house, but it was too dark to see anything inside. Recalling the scene from earlier that day, which I was familiar with, the window on the left closest to the front was their kitchen, while the one on the right, I didn't know what was inside. It was always curtained. I asked Alicia if she saw anything, and she shook her head. Jay's always having nightmares and crying. I don't want to share a room with him anymore, Dad. It's not fair. I never get to sleep. Of course, hearing this from his sister made Jay cry more. So I carried him to sleep in my room that night. Jay has a tent he loves more than his bed. And honestly, I suspected his nightmare was just an excuse to camp in my room. Being a soft-hearted dad, I let him sleep in the tent in my room for the next 2 nights. On the 3rd night, I was woken again, but not by Jay. It was Alicia. She was standing by my side, shaking my arm. She hadn't disturbed me in the middle of the night in years. When I asked what was wrong, she whispered, "The neighbor's making faces at me." Those words mixed with the fear in her voice really worried me. I closed the curtains. "Did you open them?" "Yes, a little, because I heard a weird noise, Dad." "What did you hear?" Alicia couldn't remember exactly, but from what she described, she got out of bed to see what was happening. And when she parted the curtain slightly, she saw light coming from one of the 2 windows across the street. The curtain in the right room slowly slid aside, and our neighbor was standing right at the window. What did he do? Alicia thought for a moment, then made an expression I never want to see on my daughter's face, or anyone's again. I can't describe it exactly, but it went like this. She smiled with both rows of teeth, showing a small gap in the middle, then furrowed her brow. Alicia tilted her head toward me like something out of a Kubrick film, her neck muscles tensing. But the worst part was what she did with her hands. She raised her left arm, palm up, then clenched her right hand into a fist and moved it back and forth quickly across her left arm. My poor daughter described it as playing the violin, but to me it was clearly the neighbor mimicking a violent cutting motion. Frustrated, I told Alicia to stop and never make that expression or gesture again. Angry and confused, our neighbor, a man in his 40s, somewhat reserved but unremarkable in the few brief conversations we'd had, seemed normal. I couldn't understand why he'd do something so horrific to my kids. After asking Alicia a few more questions, I realized he hadn't done anything legally wrong. Of course, it's not illegal to make inappropriate gestures in your own home, but targeting my kids specifically felt like a different issue. Putting legalities aside, I decided to talk to him the next morning. My final question to Alicia was whether the neighbor made any other gestures. She nodded, then started beckoning with both hands. I let Alicia sleep in my room that night after checking the kids' bedroom window. But like before, I saw nothing unusual. The house was pitch black. The next morning, I dropped the kids off at school and took some time to knock on the neighbor's door before my shift started. I figured he was home since his car was parked in the driveway, but no one answered. Eventually, I gave up to head to work. As I returned to my car, I glanced back quickly to see if he was watching me. Sure enough, the coward, I caught him for a split second at the kitchen window before he ducked below the sill. Out of sight, clearly he had issues. I shouted at him to stop messing with us and then left. That night, I put a plan into action. The kids slept in my room and I'd keep watch from their room. It was a Friday and I was ready to stay up all night to catch the neighbor red-handed. Though I trusted my kids, I wanted to confirm something dark was really going on, and I needed to know to take action before things got worse. After ensuring all the locks were secure and all curtains were fully closed, I put the kids to bed and stationed myself under the windowsill. Around 9 p.m., boredom hit and I started playing a show on my phone. I didn't want to use earphones and miss any strange sounds, so I kept the volume low and mostly read subtitles. Midnight came and sure enough, strange noises started just as Alicia described. It's hard to explain, but the best I can say is a repetitive clicking, like the sound you make with your tongue to call a horse. It was clearly coming from a person. After a few minutes, the sound shifted to what I thought was whistling, but it was entirely off, completely toneless. It was so distinct I guessed the neighbor's window was open, which was worrying since the distance between our houses was only about 5 meters. I was certain the neighbor was standing at his window. This was my chance to catch him. I stood and swiftly parted the curtains. Sure enough, a dim light glowed in the room, letting me see the horrific expression Alicia had mimicked the other night. Seeing my daughter do it was one thing, but watching a grown man with those exact motions was far scarier. His window was indeed open, his arms extended into the cold night air, violently scraping against each other in a bizarre mimicry of self-harm. It took a second for him to realize he was facing another man, not a helpless child. He immediately stopped his erratic movements, his stiff smile vanishing, replaced by a more genuine emotion. Rage. He grabbed the window and slammed it shut, yanking the curtains with equal force. I let my curtains fall, reeling in shock. Of course, I couldn't contain my confusion at witnessing his face and movements, which he'd done who knows how many times to intimidate my kids. But another detail worried me more. I wasn't entirely sure the man I'd just seen was my neighbor. I hadn't met him much beyond a few brief chats and struggled to recall his face. I sat on the floor for a minute, blood rushing to my ears. I thought I had enough evidence to call the police maybe. But just as I was about to pull out my phone, a loud bang hit the bedroom window. After a moment's hesitation, I parted the curtains again. The neighbors' lights were off, and no one was outside from my limited view. Curiosity pushed me to open the curtains wider, and I found a handprint smeared at the top corner of the window frame. Our house is built on a raised foundation, so even though the window is on the ground floor, it's too high for anyone to reach unless they're absurdly tall, beyond even what professional basketball players could manage. Without hesitation, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, frantically explaining the situation, then quickly checked the house to see if he was trying to break in. My final stop was the bedroom where I locked the door while still on the phone with the dispatcher. I grabbed my handgun from the safe in the closet, my heart pounding like it wanted to leap out of my chest, but I knew I had to stay calm. When I saw Alicia was awake watching me from the tent, I reassured her with the briefest words I could muster, whispering that we were fine but should stay quiet. I sat on the edge of the bed, gun ready, ears straining. The kids' tent was in the corner to the left of the wall, and directly across from where I sat was the window. After what felt like an eternity, I saw it. It was a cloudless night, and the moonlight was bright enough for me to make out a figure through the white curtains. The dark silhouette was vague at first, but grew clearer as the man outside stepped closer to the window. Somehow, he knew exactly which room we were hiding in. The figure stood motionless for minutes, and I was grateful. Alicia couldn't see it from where she was sitting. After a few minutes, something horrific followed that I still can't comprehend. The man stepped back from the glass and raised his arms, forming a long Y shape with his body and limbs. Except his arms were unnaturally long, almost twice the length of a normal arm, each one roughly matching his entire body height. At first, I thought he was holding something, maybe pipes, but seeing the hands clearly through the curtains sent my mind into panic. 5 fingers splayed on each hand, swaying slightly as he brought them closer to the window. Thump, thump, thump. I stood nearly deciding to fire, but the sound of police sirens piercing the silent night calmed my nerves. The man outside slammed his hand against the window one last time, and then, as if someone yanked him by the elbow, his long arms seemed to snap off and he fled before they hit the ground. A knock at the door and a voice identifying as police sounded outside. I rushed out to explain the situation. 2 officers, a man and a woman, asked me a few questions about my neighbor, saying it was necessary to determine if a search was warranted. After finishing, they told me to stay inside and lock the doors, then strode to the neighbor's porch. Watching through the kids' bedroom window, I saw the officers knock on the neighbor's door. When no one answered, they tried the front door handle. To my surprise, it wasn't locked. They exchanged a professional glance and cautiously entered. I'm not sure what they found inside, but when they reappeared on the porch minutes later, both looked deeply confused, radioing their headquarters. Hesitantly, I darted outside to ask them, and the female officer gave me a chillingly simple answer. Your neighbor's dead. The rest of the night was a blur of police swarming in and out of the neighbor's house. Some came to my porch afterward to ask more questions, but no one shared any further details. They investigated in hushed tones, their faces guarded, whispering as if they didn't want anything to leak out. At one point, I wandered near the side of my house and caught a glimpse of officers photographing something on the ground outside my bedroom window. Before they could stop me and ask me to leave, I saw the grotesque shape of 2 human arms, The three of us moved to my parents' house, staying there for a few months. I think everyone's fed up with the cramped living, but we don't want to move back to our house. Alicia's still too scared, and honestly, I don't feel comfortable there, while the killer's still out there. I want to sell the house and be done with it, but our story's spreading like wildfire, making it harder than ever to find a buyer who'd want to buy a house forever tied to phrases like dismembered remains, days of torture, or victims nearly unrecognizable.
Thanks for watching this video. If you like this video, drop a comment below. And please like, share and subscribe my channel.